music to the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Pun Kelly get caught in the fake. Facts and logic with a twist of chest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. Humor pulls the lies right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows that set the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity when they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Machine Pun Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Pun Show. And today I want to talk about the lawsuits that Donald Trump is seeking $230 million from the DOJ. And a couple of things before we even start getting into the details here. The first thing is he says that he's suing himself. And no, he is not suing himself. He is the president of the United States, but he's not the United States. He's not the one paying the bill. The taxpayers are. He is suing the taxpayers. He is not suing himself. And so, there's this thing that he does where he manages to take something completely outlandish and then try to nerf it so that you end up arguing about the nerfing instead of the outlandish part. So, like there's this whole thing about, oh, he's going to donate the money to charity. That doesn't matter. That is irrelevant. What he does with the money, whether we believe it or not, don't even go down that avenue because it's still the taxpayers' money. So we know he's lying, but what's the point in debating that? Because you're just entertaining the wrong discussion then. The actual discussion is, one, does he actually have any merit? And two, are there any conflicts of interest here? So I want to start with number two first. I want to talk about the conflicts of interest. And these are not marginal conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest. I'm just going to read through you a few of the conflicts of interest that are insane. What the two cases he's suing over are, one, the 2016 investigation and the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and all that's connected with that. Excuse me. The second is the classified documents investigation and all that's connected with that. In the first investigation, or in the classified documents investigation, his attorney was Todd Blanche. And now Todd Blanche is number two at the DOJ and has to personally authorize $4 million, any payments over $4 million. Trump says, well, it's up to him to approve himself. Trump says it's up to Trump to approve. But it's not up to Trump. It's up to Blanche, who is his defense attorney in the case. So it's pretty obvious there's a conflict of interest there. Then the other conflict of interest is with the Attorney General. Who has also been his defense attorney in the second impeachment hearing. So there's kind of, this is something that I've learned from the news. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but It was lawyers that were saying it. But when you're somebody's lawyer, even if like that case ends, you don't stop being their lawyer, in the sense that you still can't divulge information that you know or whatever. Like the attorney-client privilege survives after the case is over. So once a lawyer, always a lawyer. Like Pam Bondi did not used to be Trump's lawyer, and Todd Blanche did not used to be Trump's lawyer. They are both still his lawyers, ethically. So having them be the ones that approve the lawsuit is like extraordinarily unethical. And so like these are some got some quotes here. Stanley Woodward Jr., head of the DOJ's. So there's also Stanley Woodward Jr., a third conflict of interest. Stanley Woodward Jr., head of the DOJ's Civil Division, which handles such claims, has represented individuals in Trump's inner circle, including co-defendant in the classified documents case and FBI director Kash Patel. So that's like two of the people that are most involved, the two people in the DOJ most involved in this decision are the two that were actually deciding on one of the cases. They were defense attorneys on one of the cases. So it's just insane how unethical this is. Pace University ethics professor Bennett Gershom called it bizarre and almost too outlandish to believe, emphasizing the ethical conflict in having Trump's opponents approve his own claim. So then there's also under federal, I've got some congestion here. Under federal ethics laws, such as 18 U.S.C. 208, acts affecting a personal financial investment, and Office of Government Ethics Regulations, officials must recuse themselves from matters where their impartiality could reasonably be questioned, including due to prior client relationships. So there's actual laws against this, but the DOJ is the one that's supposed to be the one enforcing the laws. So Pam Bondi would have to tell Pam Bondi, no, you can't be involved. So it's like not just a lack of oversight or a lack of ethics, it's a lack of ability to enforce ethical laws that exist. So trying this new notes thing out that's on the column, on the right column here, and it's not, it's harder to look through than I thought it would be. So sorry for my wandering off here. And then this is the other thing. In July, Bondi fired the DOJ's top ethics advisor, raising questions about whether career ethics officials can provide unbiased guidance without interference. So there's just, we're going to do it and you can't stop us. And it doesn't have to go to the court. It doesn't have to at all. It can settle out of court. Donald Trump can sit there and decide with only his defense attorneys that he was wrongly prosecuted and never should have happened. And then the people that will actually make money off of it, possibly, you know, I don't know if what's his name gets a cut, you know. It's just beyond ridiculous. And it's not Trump suing Trump. Remember, we're the ones that are going to have to pay for it. He wants the U.S. citizens to pay him $230 million because he got investigated for crimes he committed. All right. So we're going to go into the next thing I want to talk about is what are the two cases? There's the case with the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the Russia and meddling and collusion and all that nonsense. And then the other one is the classified documents. So first, let me share my screen with you on so this is a timeline of the Russia investigation. And while I'm looking at this, I won't see any comments. So if you comment, I'll come back to it in a minute and walk through that with you. All right. So what they're saying is that this Russia collusion investigation was all bogus and was all just fabricated to make Trump's presidency harder or something. It's really hard to nail it down. And I always wonder, if they were going to go through all of this trouble to, rig up a false election against Trump to get Trump to ruin his presidency, why didn't they just announce the details 2 weeks before the election? And then, see where the chips fell. Instead, they announced that they were reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton 2 weeks before the election. James Comey, who is a Republican, by the way, spilled the beans on reopening Hillary's investigation, never breathed a word about the Russia investigation. So I'm just, why, why have this so-called backup plan when you could have just killed his entire campaign with releasing this? Right? So it doesn't even make sense. Even the accusation doesn't make sense. But let's go through the timeline of what happened and I'll go into the details of what they're accusing of as we go through it. But we need to first bear in mind, it did not start because of the Steele dossier. That's number one. And number two, the FISA warrant to Page had absolutely no bearing on the investigation at all, beyond just being a footnote. Like, Page was never prosecuted for anything, was never even, accused of anything. So they just investigated based on a suspicion and then found there wasn't anything. And so then they stopped investigating. Although there was some stuff getting into the FISA warrant that we'll get into. There was some stuff they did wrong, but not illegal. And so anyway, we'll get into all that. So everything started off when George Papadopoulos, who should really start a brand of popcorn. Like, Papadopoulos popcorn sounds pretty good to me. Anyway, President Trump names George Papadopoulos as part of his foreign policy advisory team with a focus on energy sector issues way back in March 21st, 2016. Oh, and one thing that's not on this chart that I should mention, the DNC computers were hacked in 2015. So before any of this happened, Russia had already hacked the DNC computers and gotten the emails that were eventually leaked. So then on April 26, 2016, Joseph Mifsud meets with Papadopoulos at the Andaz Hotel in London after returning from Russia. Mifsud claims Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails that could be damaging. So Russian dude tells campaign dude, hey, we've got all these thousands of emails on Hillary Clinton. That right there, just right there. Why don't you go to the FBI, George? Like that to me is, you can get into all the weeds that you want. But the bottom line is, Russia approached the Trump campaign and said, we've got dirt on your political opponent. And then they didn't say anything. They didn't, like, you're complicit, whether you committed any crime or not, almost becomes moot at that point because you were complicit in your silence. You knew that Russia was trying to interfere with the election and help your campaign. But because it's helping your campaign, You don't do anything about it. You just sit on the information. And it's not like they just sat on the information either. Papadopoulos meets with Alexander Downer, the Australian High Commissioner to Britain, at the Kensington Wine Rooms in London. Papadopoulos mentions that Russians have material on Hillary Clinton. So this is a month later, well, 3 weeks later, maybe 2 weeks later. Then Rob Goldenstein emails Donald Trump Jr. saying, Emin Agalrov has asked to arrange a meeting to provide the Trump campaign with official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary from Russia. Trump Jr. responds, if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. So we've got a timeline going on, right? Why later in the summer? How about like just a few days before the DNC convention? So Russia hacks the emails. Russia approaches the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign doesn't do anything. Then they get this email saying, hey, you know, we've got this dirt. You want it? So then they have a meeting. They all get together. Meeting take place at Trump Tower in New York between Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and Russian lawyer Natalia Volinsky, along with Russian American lobbyists Rinat Akhmetsans and others. The meeting was arranged on the promise of damaging information about Clinton, but reportedly focused on the Majinsky Act and Russian adoptions. I do not believe when they say it was about the Majinsky Act and Russian adoptions, when we know for a fact that the whole point they went there for was to get dirt on Hillary. Like, that's just dumb. And the only evidence we have is that the people that were conspiring together conspired together to lie. You know, they all had the same story. So they must be telling the truth. Like, I just don't believe that. But again, why, when Junior got the email, why didn't they report it to the FBI? Hey, FBI, Russia has like threatening to involve itself in our elections. Like, again, there's malfeasance there, whether there's a crime or not. And there's certainly reasonable suspicion to think, gee, maybe we should investigate this. Not investigate the campaign, but investigate Russia. So the meeting takes place, and then, woe and behold, July 22nd, 2016, the WikiLeaks are released. WikiLeaks publishes approximately 19,252 emails and 8,034 attachments from the DNC committee just 3 days before the Democratic National Convention. The leak shows DNC bias favoring Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, leading to the resignation of DNC chairman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which, by the way, one of the things I think gets glossed over with all this, I'm not sure why the DNC wanting an actual Democrat to be the Democratic candidate is wrong. Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat. He doesn't identify as a Democrat. I appreciate that he runs as a Democrat so we don't have a split ticket. But I also don't blame the DNC for not just turning over the party to Bernie Sanders. And there's all kinds of disinformation out there about the Bernie Sanders situation that Russia was also pumping out. This is like, remember, this is when the whole fake news thing became a thing. And it wasn't news I don't like the way it is now. Fake news was literally made up. Like a dude sitting at his computer just inventing stories and throwing them out on these fake news websites and then sharing them on Facebook and getting grandma and grandpa to, grandma and grandpa boomer go and start sharing it. And so a lot of the disinformation got circulated that way. And it wasn't just, negative stuff about Clinton, and it wasn't just good stuff about Trump that was being shared. There was also a lot of the disinformation about Bernie Sanders came from this fake news operation. It was an actual operation. And I know this because the guy who was carrying out the operation talked about it. There was a whole interview with him and everything. It was like one dude, but he was getting paid for and having all his fake news pushed out through Russian interference. So then, after the WikiLeaks released the DNC emails, the Australian government advises American authorities about Alexander Downer's May encounter with Papadopoulos, where Papadopoulos had mentioned Russians processing damaging material on Clinton, or possessing damaging material on Clinton. So they made that connection. The hurricane, Operation Hurricane, and not even, or Crossfire Hurricane, had not even started yet. This was all like the Trump, the meeting with Papadopoulos, the Papadopoulos meeting with Downer, the Russian or the Trump Tower meeting, the DNC leaks, all of this, or the WikiLeaks, all of this happened before the investigation even started. And so then the Australian government says, this seems kind of suspicious that they said that they were going to release all this damaging information on Clinton, and now there's all this damaging information on Clinton being released. So then they open Crossfire Hurricane, a counterintelligence investigation into links between presidential campaign and Russia. The investigation initially targets George Papadopoulos, Mike Flynn, Paul Manafort, and Carter Page and Roger Stone. The codename comes from Rolling Stone song Jumpin' Jack Flash. So this did not start because of the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier, they didn't know the Steele dossier even existed yet. This is entirely based on Russia coming to somebody in Trump's campaign, and then that person in Trump campaign telling people from Australia that he had been approached. And then there being an actual meeting where the purpose of the meeting was to get dirt and ideally leaked later in the summer. Then that information was leaked later in the summer. And then Australia called and said, hey, this seems kind of suspicious to us. The FBI says, it does seem kind of suspicious. Maybe we should investigate this. This was not something they made up. It's not something Michael Steele made up. It's not something that was invented for political purposes. Russia was actually approaching us and wanting to interfere in the election. Russia was actually interfering in the election, and the FBI did its due diligence by investigating that. So then Peter Strauss, I can't remember how to, is it, I think it might be Strauss, and another agent traveled to London to interview Alexander Downer directly about his conversation with Papadopoulos. Downer clarified that Papadopoulos had not claimed a direct conflict with Russians and that his comments were vague. So then Brennan briefs Comey, although, why call? If I feel like there's some kind of why call? Why call and say, hey, this happened? So if you really felt like nothing happened. So Brennan briefs Comey on Russian interference. CIA Director John Brennan shares intelligence about Russian interference with FBI Director James Comey. The FBI's concerns about Russian election interference become clear following this briefing. So now you've got, this is where John Brennan and James Comey get involved. So then this is one of their big sticking points. This is one of the things where, and the FBI was not perfect here. The FBI made mistakes, but that's all they were, was mistakes. And that's according to the independent prosecutor that investigated this. The FBI obtains a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act FISA warrant to monitor Carter Page's communications. The warrant application states the FBI believes Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the government. The government is signed by FBI Director James Comey and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates. This warrant would be renewed 3 times. So this became like one of the things. The last 2 times, it was retroactively said they shouldn't have gotten it. And they misstated the legitimacy of the Steele dossier in getting this warrant. That said, they also concluded that Carter Page was never prosecuted for anything, and that there's no fruit of the poison tree, what they call. There's nothing that was obtained from the warrant that was used elsewhere in the investigation. So, and sometimes these kinds of things happen. They've revised FBI procedure to minimize it happening again. But this is not the only time that this kind of thing has happened. And it doesn't mean there's like some big plot to get Trump, because it didn't lead to anything, which makes it, they're taking this one thing, this one flaw in the entire investigation, and they're building a big mountain out of the tiniest little molehill. And they've misrepresented this too. Like Trump, they did not spy on Trump. They didn't spy on his campaign. They had a warrant for Carter Page's communications. Carter Page is not Donald Trump. Carter Page is not the campaign. It was only Carter Page. Well, there were also, I think, 3 other FISA warrants that were issued, but all 3 of those led to convictions. So then they leaked the second batch of DNC emails 2 days before the election. And an election that was very, very close, I might add. An election that, provided if they had not leaked those, that could have tipped the scale. You know what else could have tipped the scale? James Comey not having a press conference reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton 2 weeks before the election. When they say that like Russian interference didn't affect the election at all, well, it did. You're saying that nobody looked at this stuff and said, gee, I'm not going to vote for her because of this. All the fake news and stuff, all that stuff about, like the Clinton Foundation and the scandals and all of that fake news. And it was literally fake news. It was literally news that people just made up and published as fact. So the intelligence community assessment release. This was another thing. So the CIA, FBI, and NSA published a declassified intelligence community assessment titled Assessing Russian Activities and Intentions in Russia in Recent U.S. Elections. The assessment concludes Russia interfered to help Trump. Later investigations revealed the Steele dossier was included in the assessment despite objections from senior CIA analysts. Brennan allegedly overruled these objections. This is so tiny. And this is actually why they're trying to prosecute him. What happened is there is a footnote, I think maybe like 2 references to the Steele dossier in the entire assessment. And it's not like they based everything on the Steele dossier. And they weren't like the primary, like it was never noted as the primary source, but like as a supplementary. Well, and this is also consistent with the Steele dossier. You could have taken those footnotes out and not had any impact on the intelligence community assessment release. So then they asked Brennan, was the Steele dossier the basis for anything? And he said, no, because it's not. It wasn't the basis. It was in the report, but it wasn't the basis for the report. And that might seem like parsing, but it's not. There is a big difference between this is the reason we did that, and this is like something else that supports why we did that. I think it was only mentioned twice. And I don't even know if what they were mentioning was actually wrong, because they act like everything in the dossier was a lie. And even Steele said not everything in it was true. It says that, like throughout the report, it says, everything, this is secondhand information, and you don't want to, take all of this verbatim, but that like 80% of it has been validated. It's not like everything in it was a lie. There's a lot of actual verified intelligence that came out of this. Also, it wasn't a Clinton research. Started off as a GOP op research against Trump in the primaries. Then the Clinton law firm, the Clinton campaign law firm, carried on the research, or carried on the investigation, paid for carrying it on. Hillary Clinton herself actually had no knowledge, or she didn't involve herself with any of that. So they get this assessment in January, like right before the inauguration. Ironically, on January 6, 2017. Something funny happened 4 years later. You might have heard about it. This was not, but this right here, this intelligence report is the basis for like so much of the conspiracy stuff you hear right now, was just these two references to the Steele dossier, which wasn't even the basis for anything. It was just a footnote. So then Trump fires FBI Director Comey in May. President Trump fires Director James Comey. Trump later stated in an interview that he had decided to fire Comey before receiving advice from Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, and mentioned the Russia investigation. So yeah, he fired Comey because they were still investigating Russia. And this is why this whole conflict of interest thing, just that there's even a question about this, is insane. Yes, he fired Comey for investigating him, and not just for like it was never even an investigation into Trump. In all honesty, it was an investigation into Russia. So then, after that, there was enough stink raised that Sessions, who was, as far as I know, or that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein appoints Robert Mueller. Rosenstein was a Trump appointee, right? This was the Trump administration that opened up the Mueller investigation. They want to make it like MAGA memory is so weird and conflated that everything that bad that happened during Trump's presidency was Biden's fault or Obama's fault. The only one that wasn't president while Trump was president to them is Trump. All right. But it was Trump's administration that opened up the investigation, the Mueller investigation. Didn't have anything at all to do with the Democrats. It was not a Democrat investigation. Mueller's not even a Democrat. It was a Republican who appointed the deputy attorney general, who appointed a Republican to investigate the Russian interference. And again, to investigate Russian interference, not to investigate Trump. This marks the transfer from Crossfire Hurricane to the Mueller investigation. Mueller is authorized to investigate any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump. So then, in May 23rd, John Brennan testifies before the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence at open hearing Russian active measures during the 2016 election campaign. He states the Steele dossier was not in any way used as a basis for the intelligence community assessment. So this is what I was talking about earlier. It was not used as a basis. It wasn't. The dossier was included in the ICA in both main body and an annex, though the dispute centers on whether it formed a basis for the assessment's conclusions. And it's not really a debate. It's the debate is over the word basis. It's not a debate over whether it actually was a basis, because it wasn't. But the Republicans are trying to conflate basis with inclusion, and it was included, but it was not the basis. If they wanted to ask the question, was the Steele dossier mentioned at all in the report, then they should have asked that question. But it was in no way the basis for the investigation. It wasn't. Because it was impossible for it to be, because they didn't even have the Steele dossier when they started the investigation. So then there was a big investigation. We're going to bump up a couple of years here. And there was a big investigation into Crossfire Hurricane investigation. The report identifies 17 basic and fundamental errors and omissions in FISA applications for Carter Page. So the FISA application for Carter Page, there was some fundamental errors there, some omissions, no crimes, but that was it. Everything outside of Carter Page, there were no issues with, according to the IG inspection that was, again, under the Trump administration. The report confirms the investigation was properly predicated based on the Papadopoulos information. So here's where we go back to that word basis. It was not the basis. The Steele campaign was not the basis. The Papadopoulos report was. So then in January of 2020, the Department of Justice determines that the third and fourth FISA warrants to surveil Carter Page lacked probable cause and should not have been issued. The DOJ admits to material misstatements and omissions in those applications. And again, that's not illegal. That is a procedural error and one that has been revised. And I'm not saying that that justifies it. And I think what happened to Carter Page was unfair. But that does not warrant, no pun intended there, actually, even though this is the pun show. That does not warrant giving Donald Trump $130 million or whatever for this lawsuit. It's not broken down by how much each one is. He just wants $230 million altogether. But so those, and it's also just the last two. The first two were valid, by the way, and nothing came of this again. So then in May of 2023, Brennan testifies to the House Judiciary Committee. The CIA was very much opposed to having any reference or inclusion of the Steele dossier in the intelligence community assessment, and that the CIA was not involved at all with the dossier. Well, it wasn't involved with the dossier. And the actual reality is that there were people in the CIA who were opposed to having any reference or inclusion of the Steele dossier. But as director of the CIA, he was allowed to oppose that, and he did. So I don't see the issue here. They're saying he lied to the House Judiciary Committee. He lied to Congress. Well, it seems like they really pick and choose what includes a lie and when they're allowed to. Because I watched Pam Bondi lie her face off. I watched Kash Patel lie until his eyeballs popped out of his head and back in and popped out again. Like, if lying to Congress is this big crime, you're being awful selective in when to enforce it. And this wasn't even really a lie. This is something that is being taken out of context and kind of shoehorned into something that kind of sort of fits a lie. So then, just in July, declassification reveals dossier inclusion, which was again just barely included and not the basis. So the documents allegedly show Brennan supporting including the dossier over objections from some CIA Russia experts, which Republicans claim contradicts his testimony about CIA opposition to its inclusion. So this is what I mean. We're just getting into semantics now. We're not talking about actual, ethical or moral wrongdoings. This is the Republicans trying to distort reality to prop up what was Russian interference to legitimize what was an illegitimate presidency, in the sense that Trump's presidency only existed because of Russian interference. So whether he did anything wrong or not, he still was president because Russia interfered in our election. And he knew that Russia was interfering in our elections, and he did nothing. We know he knew because while his team was meeting with Russians in the Trump Tower to get dirt on Hillary Clinton, he was in his office upstairs. The idea that this was some hoax is ridiculous. And any news person that is worth anything that tells you otherwise should be fired on the spot. Russia interfered in the 2016 elections. That is a fact, not an opinion. So now Brennan's been referred for criminal prosecution because of his perjury. Okay? And this all is what Donald Trump is claiming is the basis for this. Is all what Trump is claiming is the basis for this first half of the lawsuit. It's based on two things, right? One, the third and fourth Carter Page FISA warrants that shouldn't have been authorized, which had no connection to the investigation beyond any of that. That was it. That's the totality of everything with that, is just these two FISA warrants for Carter Page. And the other thing is this quibbling over and parsing over the word basis. That's it. That's it. That is why he wants 100 million of your tax dollars. Hey, Kitty. I am so glad you're covering this. Patel always has a surprise. I don't understand why he wears his eyeballs outside of his face. It's so weird. Like, can you push them back in or something? You're like a stuffed animal or something. So that covers the first investigation, right? And or the first lawsuit. And there is nothing here. And there's also all kinds of laws, like, you talk about qualified immunity and all of that kind of stuff for police. There's also federal versions for that, right? That there is no basis at all to say that the FBI just made everything up or fabricated everything or anything like that. And the idea that it was to interfere with the election, if it were to interfere with the election, again, why did they not say anything before the election? Who did they talk about the days before the election? Which investigation did they talk about? The very serious one into Donald Trump, or reopening the one into Hillary Clinton that had already been closed, already been dismissed, and then open it, like then because Wiener's wife has a laptop, we got to reopen this, even though there was nothing new there. And they didn't announce a press conference and say, that there was nothing there. They just put out a press release. So there were people there that were still thinking Hillary Clinton was guilty of something. They still do. There are people that were like, oh, she doesn't even know C stands for classified. I'm a comedian that wants to be a sex therapist. Well, I'm actually, neither one of those things is true. If I were to be a comedian, I'd have to be funny sometimes. Okay, so that's that investigation. Now, again, I'm going to go to another screen and look through another one of these timelines into the Trump documents scandal. But before I do that, I just want to cover real quick what happened with Biden, because I hear so much of the nonsense. Okay, so what happened with Biden is there was an office that had, it wasn't even like his office. He didn't go there. It was some kind of research committee for his library or something like that they had found a few documents in. And this was during the whole Trump thing. So then to avoid, to as a precautionary thing, Biden, they didn't execute a search warrant. Biden invited the FBI to come and search his house to see if there were any documents there. And they found some documents in a box in the garage. Now, I don't know what you think happens when the vice president leaves his office. If you think that he sits there and meticulously goes through all the documents and decides what goes where, or if his staffers just jam things into boxes. Pretty sure it's the latter. And so what happened is some documents got put in a box that got put in his garage. And he may or may not have known that they were there. He probably didn't, because when he found out some other documents were there, he actually had them come pick them up. And I think there is something sort of systemic in the way that elected officials treat confidential documents sometimes. But this was not at all what happened with Trump. Okay. And when I can't remember the prosecutor, who, by the way, Biden appointed the investigation into himself and never talked about a witch hunt. So they did an investigation into it, and so there were these documents, and then the attorney that was doing the investigation said that he would have to prove not just that the documents were there, but that Biden knew they were there. And in order to do that, he would have to convince a jury that by the time Biden was out of office and the trial had proceeded to a certain point, then they would have to, decide whether or not he could remember that those documents were there at the time. And so you're sitting there, there's an 85-year-old man, and you're asking him to, remember something that happened 20 years ago. They might not find that they might find some reasonable doubt that he actually knew and remembered that those documents were there. So that's what he was talking about when he said, about the memory of an 85-year-old man, or however he said it. But that was it. That was just not nearly the same volume, and not like, we'll go through this, but remember the main things are: one, there weren't that many documents with Biden. Two, Biden actually invited the FBI to come in and inspect his house and see if there were any there. And three, there's no indication that Biden knew they were there. So it's a big difference, because part of the whole thing with classified documents and knowing about classified documents or being prosecuted for possession of classified documents, you have to know they're there. Otherwise, I could just go and steal some classified documents, throw them in the back seat of your car, call the FBI, and have you prosecuted because you had possession of classified documents you shouldn't have. You don't even know where they came from. Well, same thing. If you don't know they're there, then you don't know they're there. It was the same thing with why they didn't prosecute Hillary. It was knowledge. There were some emails that were sent that should have been classified that weren't, but they weren't marked classified, so she didn't know they were classified. And there was other stuff, too. But that was like, the intent is a really big part of this whole thing. And that's why there's a huge difference between Trump and Biden on the classified documents front. So let's go through the timeline on this. Okay. So Trump leaves office on January 20th after he's run out of other options. So he departs the White House at the end of his term. Staff members are seen carrying boxes, including a white banker box. Trump fails to notify the National Archives and Records Administration that he has removed hundreds of presidential records, including highly classified materials, in violation of the Presidential Records Act. And he goes on and on about the Presidential Records Act. The Presidential Records Act was literally written to prevent exactly this sort of thing from happening. Like, he has reversed the meaning of the Presidential Records Act. Richard Nixon, when he left the White House, wanted to take everything with him, including the tapes. And eventually they blocked him from doing that, and they passed the Presidential Records Act to say all the documents related to your presidency belong to the people, not to you. There's something called the Clinton sock drawer, all right? And that is an exception that's made for, like personal gifts, not gifts to the White House or gifts to the president, but gifts to the person. Like, those things you can have. And it was because there were some things like that Bill Clinton was gifted, that Bill Clinton was allowed to take with him. And that's the exception. That's not the rule. Anything that's like an official document that's related to your presidency, like the Iran invasion plans that you had specifically drawn up, are not yours to take. So, setting aside the whole classified versus not classified thing, just taking the documents themselves, knowingly taking these documents, is already a crime. So then NARA discovers the missing documents, National Archives. So 5 months later, the National Archives informs Trump that a number of official documents have not been transferred to its custody as required by law. They're just doing their jobs. They're like, hey, this document isn't there, and this one's not there. This one really should be there, considering it's the battle plans for Iran. Where is that? So they notice all this stuff is gone. And so they call Trump. They say, hey, can you bring those back? And it's just that they were negotiating with Trump's representatives to retrieve the missing documents over the following months. Why negotiating? Like, they gave him a chance to turn them over. They even negotiated with him to turn them over. But he wouldn't turn them over. So then a White House employee advises return. So a guy from the White House actually flew to Mar-a-Lago and told Trump, whatever you have, give everything back. Let them come here and get everything. Don't give them a noble reason to indict you, because they will. So then between November and January, Trump allegedly has employees bring boxes from storage to his residence to review contents. So he's got these people who have no classified clearance handling these boxes and reviewing the contents of them to see what he can keep and what he shouldn't keep. And they're not taking out the stuff that's classified and saying this really needs to go back. They're taking out the stuff that's classified and saying we really need to keep this. So then he returns 15 boxes to NARA. Trump voluntarily turns over 15 boxes of presidential records to the National Archives. When archivists review the materials, they discover 184 classified documents, totaling 700 pages. So I guess they did send back some of the classified stuff, but not all of the classified stuff. So 25 of them were top secret, 92 were secret, 67 were confidential. Some materials include special access programs, signals intelligence, and documents marked. I don't know what all of that means. But this is not stuff that just random pool boys should be, like reviewing anyway. And they reviewed this stuff. So then NARA refers the matter to DOJ because there were these classified documents, right? And so this is like, well, worth investigating. So the FBI opens a criminal investigation. Remember, he has been out of office for 1.5 years now. NARA's already gone through the trouble of asking for them back, negotiating to get them back. They've been tried to get them back without using legal force already for 1.5 years. So now the FBI formally opens a criminal investigation into Trump's handling of classified documents and potential violations of federal law, including possible violations of the Espionage Act. And I just want to compare this and contrast this with Biden, who, within a few weeks, had the FBI in his own home voluntarily looking for any classified material, returning them, and then appointing a special counsel to investigate himself just to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Then that special counsel investigated him and says, I can't prove he did anything wrong. There's no case here. So then a grand jury opens an investigation in April 26, 2022. A federal grand jury opens an investigation into Trump's handling and retention of classified documents after leaving office. So by May 11th, that grand jury subpoena was issued. So they're going through normal legal means. It's not just Donald Trump or that Joe Biden or Merrick Garland or whoever your boogeyman is here decided on a whim to subpoena him, and they just bypassed a grand jury. There were actual civilians that sat in a room and listened to all the evidence and said, yeah, this looks like it warrants an investigation. So the federal grand jury issues a subpoena demanding return of all the documents with classified markings in Trump's possession. So between May 23rd and June 2nd, Trump employee Walt Nualta allegedly moved 64 boxes in and out of the storage room, according to surveillance footage later subpoenaed by the Justice Department. So this is I hate it when they say allegedly. When it's not alleged, it's an actual thing. It's not just somebody's saying he did that. The video of him doing that is pretty much he moved. You can just say Walt Nualta moved 64 boxes in and out of the storage room, according to surveillance reports, or later subpoenaed by the Justice Department. So then he's like, the NARA first asked him to turn over everything. He turned over some things and lied about it. Then they found out, no, he's still got other stuff. So then a grand jury said, or so they sent somebody out from the White House. And I'm sorry, I got my timeline confused here. So first NARA says, do something, can you turn this over? They negotiate with him for several months to try to get him to turn it over. He doesn't. Somebody from the White House comes out, says, can you turn it over? Because you're going to get indicted if you don't. And so he turns over like some of it after reviewing to make sure all the really good juicy stuff he keeps on. And then so he sends back the non-juicy stuff. And then they look through it again and they say, oh, this isn't, everything. So then they turn it over to the Department of Justice. Department of Justice goes to a grand jury. Grand jury says, you need to turn these over. And so then after that, he goes through and he has his pool boy like sitting there going back and forth and carrying all these boxes around in order to hide them. So the DOJ's top counterintelligence officers traveled to Mar-a-Lago to collect documents. So they finally got a search warrant. The DOJ's top counterintelligence officer travels to Mar-a-Lago to collect documents pursuant to the subpoena. Trump's lawyers turn over 38 classified documents, including 17 top secret, 16 secret, and 5 confidential in a single envelope. Trump attorney signs a certification stating that all the classified documents in Mar-a-Lago have been returned. A statement prosecutors later allege was false. And they allege it was false because it was false. All right. So he has lied again and again. He has obfuscated. He's moved stuff around. He's had people that have no business seeing any of this stuff, like reviewing it. There are so many laws broken, and we're not even done yet. And compare this again with what Biden did, which was just go ahead, look at my house, do it, find what you can find. One was anything but cooperative, and one was completely cooperative. And that's a big difference here, because this shows intent to hide and intent to keep and, actual like crime involved. That's the difference. So Trump is served with another subpoena, this time for the surveillance camera footage from Mar-a-Lago. At Trump's direction, services voluntarily accepted and responsive video footage is provided to the government. Federal investigators receive information from at least one witness that more classified material may still be at his residence. So he's still hiding stuff. After all of this stuff, he's still hiding stuff. So then they get a search warrant now. This was the last one was just executing the subpoena. Now they get a search warrant. We're going to go through and we're going to actually look through your house to see what else is there. So U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart approves the FBI's request for a search warrant for Mar-a-Lago, finding probable cause that crimes may have been committed. The warrant authorizes searching for evidence of violations of the Espionage Act, obstruction of justice, and unlawful removal or destruction of records. So you have a judge involved now. You have you had a subpoena from a grand jury. You had a second subpoena from a grand jury. Now you've got a search warrant from a judge. This is not like just something that was fabricated. So then the FBI executes a search at Mar-a-Lago in an unprecedented move. And this is an unprecedented move because Trump had committed an unprecedented crime. No president had tried to just collect thousands of dozens of classified documents at their home, and had so brazenly broken the law and just shattered it into thousands of pieces. So the FBI executes a court-authorized search warrant at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. Agents recover over 13,000 government documents from 33 boxes, 103 documents with classified markings, including 18 top secret, 54 secret, and 31 confidential documents. Classified materials are found in various unsecured locations, including a ballroom. Well, There you go. A bathroom, an office, a bedroom, and storage room. Some documents contain information about the nuclear capabilities of foreign countries, U.S. military plans, and intelligence sources. They have it on tape where he's sitting there telling this ghostwriter, reporter, or whatever it was, some kind of writer, that he's waving the invasion plans of Iran in her face, going, look what I have. And even his own lawyers are saying, we've got a problem here. Like, this is unprecedented because Trump's actions were unprecedented. And the right-wing media likes to spin this like, oh, nobody was ever treated this way. Well, nobody ever deserved to be treated this way. So then judge appoints special master, which, you know, future Supreme Court Justice Judge Eileen Cannon grants Trump's request to appoint a special master to review materials, seized from Mar-a-Lago, and temporarily blocks the DOJ from using the documents in its investigation. And I like, this is like they invested, this was 2022, right? And I get that, you know, some people are like, Merrick Garland acted too slow, but on this one, there were 2 years that Trump managed to just keep kicking the can down the road. It's not all Garland's fault. And, you know, honestly, whether Garland should have been personally involved is a whole other issue. I sometimes I see, you know, like why people say are upset with Garland, but I can also see why you don't want the attorney general being personally involved in prosecuting the former president. And I say that because right now, whatever you would want Merrick Garland to have done, you're saying you're okay with Pam Bondi doing. And this is like, you've always, sometimes Democrats cannot think more than one chess move ahead. So I'll just say that much about it. So U.S. District Judge, you know, like all of these prosecutions right now, they're already using as justification, you know, like what happened to Trump. Imagine if it had been even worse. Judge appoints special master. So the decision is later criticized and overturned by the 11th Circuit of Appeals on December 22nd, which rules Cannon overstepped her authority. And she did. And like a lot of stuff she did, her judicial decisions were not, according to like most lawyers, sound decisions. So then Jack Smith gets appointed in November 18th. And I just want to point out, like, I think it's one of the, I can't remember if it's Beavis Trump or Butthead Trump, but one of them has been going around saying that Jack Smith planted these envelopes. Well, okay, when was the August 8th? They searched it, and November 18th, he was appointed special counsel. So either he invented a time machine, went back in time, planted those things 3 months earlier, or he didn't plant the things. This comes 3 days after Trump announces his 2024 presidential campaign, so that he can now, 2 years ahead of the election, start declaring that it's election interference. An investigation that started before he was a candidate is now election interference. So then, finally, almost a year later, Trump gets indicted on federal charges. They indicted Trump on 37 counts, making him the first former president to face federal criminal charges. The indictment includes 31 counts of willful retention of national defense information under the Espionage Act, plus counts for conspiracy to obstruct justice, withholding documents, concealing documents, and making false statements. Trump's aide, Walt Nauta, is indicted on 6 counts. Special Counsel Smith emphasizes our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States. And I would just like to point out, the substance of these investigations The substance of these charges has never been defended by Trump or anybody else. They'll attack the legitimacy of the investigation through a lot of fallacy and bogusness and stupidity, but they never actually respond to the legitimacy of the evidence that was collected, which is why I think you've got either Beavis or Butthead going on TV and talking about how it was all just manufactured by what's his name, by Jack Smith. All right, so then Trump is arraigned in federal court on June 13th. He pleads not guilty to all 37 counts. He is released without bond and no travel restrictions as imposed. The case is assigned to, guess who? Judge Eileen Cannon. A superseding indictment adds 3 more charges, bringing Trump's total to 40 counts. A new defense, the defendant, Carlos D'Oliveira, is charged along with Trump and Nada. The new charges relate to attempts to delete surveillance footage. The indictment also adds another count. Superseding indictment filed, not failed. The new charges relate to attempts to delete surveillance footage. The indictment also, and this is like where they were deleting the footage from the pool or something. The indictment also adds another account for Trump regarding retention of classified documents about Iran that he allegedly shows to visitors at his Bedminster Club in July 2021. That's the writer that I was referring to. You don't get to sit there and wave battle plans to invade Iran and brag about how you made your generals write that up and then deny that you knew that they were there. And he's on tape. You can hear the tape. He's like saying it. So, but then Judge Cannon dismisses the case, the entire classified documents case against Trump, in a 93-page ruling. She rules that special counsel Jack Smith's appointment violates the appointment clause of the United States Constitution because it was not appointed by the president or confirmed by the Senate. The decision comes on the first day of the Republican National Convention, 2 days after an assassination attempt on Trump, which is irrelevant. Cannon's reasoning closely tracks a concurring opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas in a recent Supreme Court immunity case. Legal experts expressed shock at the ruling, which contradicts decades of precedent, including the Watergate-era Supreme Court case, United States versus Nixon. So yes, Judge Cannon threw it out, but Judge Cannon was appointed by Trump, and Judge Cannon wants to become a Supreme Court secretary or Supreme Court justice. The ruling itself would have never survived an appeal with a real, actual, bona fide court. So then Smith has appealed the decision with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, arguing that Judge Cannon erred when in dismissing the case, and it never got to be heard. That was it. The appeal continues for Trump's co-defendants, Nada and D'Oliveira. I'm not sure which one is represented by Bondi. Is it Bondi? One of the people that are making the decision on this suit is actually still representing. I don't know which one it is, not or D'Oliveira. So then Trump wins the election, and then Smith drops all charges against Trump, citing DOJ policy prohibiting prosecution of sitting presidents. So not that it, he says the government's position on the merits of the defendant's prosecution has not changed. This outcome is not based on the merits or strength of the case. The charges are dismissed without prejudice, meaning Trump could theoretically face charges again after leaving office. Smith continues the appeal for co-defendants, Nada and D'Oliveira, noting no principle of temporary immunity applies to them. So then on January 7th, Smith submitted his final report. And then the election interference special counsel Jack Smith completes his work and submits his final confidential report to the Department of Justice. The report is in 2 volumes, one covering the election interference investigation, one covering the classified documents case. The election interference investigation is the DC investigation that was also a separate case, other than the first 2. The election interference volume is released publicly on January 14th, but Judge Cannon issues an order blocking release of the classified documents volume. So we'll never know. Jack Smith officially resigned from the Department of Justice, separating from his position as special counsel. His departure comes 10 days before Trump's inauguration for a second term as president. Trump had previously vowed to fire Smith within 2 seconds of taking office. And I'd like to point out, Smith did nothing wrong. Trump did. Trump stole 184 classified documents and 15 boxes. Trump stole wait. I'm sorry. So there were 184 classified documents and 15 documents. There were 22 or 38 of those were returned after the subpoena. So 108 were seized in the FBI search. There have been a total of 325 recovered, over 13,000 documents in all, and there's 40 criminal counts in the criminal indictment. So that's the gist of it. The idea that somehow the federal government did something wrong here, or that the Department of Justice did something wrong here, other than bend over backwards to try to appease Trump, is insane. Donald Trump belongs in jail, not in the Oval Office. And again, there's not a single substantive thing that was done wrong in the Mar-a-Lago case and in the case about the 2016 election. There was only a handful of people that misrepresented the Steele report and the Crossfire Hurricane investigation to get a warrant that led to nothing. That's already been investigated by a special prosecutor and independent counsel, and it's been ruled there's nothing wrong with. Like, not that there's nothing wrong with it, but that there's nothing illegal. There were procedural errors and procedural things that were done wrong, but no crimes. But for some reason, that means we need to fork over $230 million to the guy that sat above the meeting where Russia is saying they want to give dirt on Hillary Clinton. Whether they did or not is irrelevant at that point. That he intended to says a lot. And he certainly did a lot of wrong crimes when it came to Russia. So, all right, we've got some kitty comments. Okay. This is, oh, wait, no, okay. I must have said something funny at some point. Witch hunt always means he's guilty. Yes. It's like, if you're a witch, then don't complain about witch hunts, dude. So I think that's all I want to cover today. I just want, like, this is where we are somehow. I really wonder, like, how MAGAs deal with this. Did they just pretend it didn't happen? I mean, he literally kept top secret documents in the pooper. That's my, PG rated Jasmine Crockett. But yeah, that happened. They were on that stage. They were being handled by people that had no security clearance. They were in places where people could just walk around and do it. Oh, and then they're like, oh, well, we moved him behind a padlock. Oh, gee, yeah, because the greatest spies in the world can't work around a padlock. Like, nobody could pick a padlock. And I think one of the things that like should be concerning about all this is one of the, I think it was Nalda, said that he went in there and a box had been knocked on the floor, and like, who knocked it on the floor? If you're the only one with the key, who knocked it on the floor? So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Thanks for watching another episode of the Punch Show, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.